Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and demystify the seriously intimidating world of global financial meltdowns. Today, we're going to capture the absolute essentials of Ray Dalio's blueprint for understanding big debt crises, and we'll do it in 8 minutes or less. If you've ever felt like the global economy operates in chaotic, mysterious ways, or that financial crashes just come completely out of nowhere, well, the insights we're about to unpack are going to completely change how you see things. So, it's a massive question to start with, right? Are debt crises actually inevitable? People always wonder if we can just, regulate our way out of them forever. But according to Dalio's massive research, he literally examined 48 historical crises across different countries over the last century. The answer is a resounding yes. Because human nature is involved, lending is basically never done perfectly. But hey, there's a silver lining here. While they are inevitable, they're also surprisingly predictable. Here's a quick look at our agenda for this explainer. We'll cover how credit and debt actually work, the archetypal debt cycle, spotting bubbles, the bust, and finally, the 4 levers for recovery. All right, section 1, how credit and debt work, basically the engine of the economy. Let's break it down. Credit is simply the giving of buying power, and debt is just the promise to pay it back later. Now, debt often gets a bad rap, but it's super important to understand that credit itself isn't inherently a bad thing. I mean, credit lets us build incredible, productive things like subways, factories, and schools. Debt problems only really pop up when there's an inability to service those payments. If the credit produces enough economic benefit to actually pay for itself, it's a win-win for everyone. So here's the crucial point. When you borrow, you aren't just borrowing from a bank. You're essentially borrowing from your future self. You get cash to spend more than you make today, but you guarantee a time in the future where you'll have to spend less than you make to pay it back. You create this mechanical cycle. It's kind of like a giant game of Monopoly. Early in the game, property is king, right? Everyone happily converts their cash into real estate. But later on in the game, cash becomes king because players desperately need it to pay rents. And if you don't have the cash flow, well, you're in trouble. Moving on to section 2, the archetypal debt cycle. This is a very predictable sequence of events. Check this out. Dalio's archetype, which he built by basically averaging out all those historical crises, shows us that financial meltdowns are not random at all. They follow a very predictable 7-stage journey. Looking at this, the blue line represents total debt as a percentage of the economy, and that red line is the debt service, meaning the actual cost to pay back that debt. Notice how these lines just steadily climb together before the cycle inevitably peaks and reverses. So we kick things off in step 1, the Goldilocks phase. Here, everything is just right. Borrowing is driving healthy growth, and balance sheets are looking strong. But human nature being what it is, we always push a good thing a little too far. People start to assume the good times will last forever, and we transition straight into a bubble. By step 2, debts begin to rise much faster than incomes. But because asset prices are soaring, borrowers feel incredibly wealthy and lenders get super complacent. Which brings us to section 3, spotting the bubble and looking at history's warning signs. So how do we actually know when we've crossed the line into a dangerous bubble? Well, by quantifying past cycles, Dalio found specific warning signs that literally always flash right before the music stops. Look at how the exact same indicators were present before the devastating crashes of 1929, 2000, and 2007. Prices were high relative to traditional measures. Purchases were aggressively financed by massive leverage. There was a huge flood of new, inexperienced market participants, and there was this broad, unquestioning bullish sentiment. Basically, everyone was absolutely convinced prices could only go up. And this brilliantly illustrates the hidden danger going on during that exact bubble phase, which we've highlighted here. During this time, borrowers feel incredibly rich because of rising asset prices, so they just spend recklessly. And lenders? They're more than happy to hand over money based on those inflated asset values. But look closely at that red line representing debt service. The promises to deliver money are vastly outpacing the actual money coming in. These debt-to-income ratios simply aren't sustainable forever. Section 4, the bust and depression. This is when cash becomes king. Eventually, that upward cycle hits a brick wall at what's called the top. Very often, this happens when central banks realize things are overheating and they raise interest rates to cool the bubble down. As those rates rise, highly leveraged borrowers get squeezed immediately. Asset prices start to fall, and that absolutely destroys the value of the collateral backing the loans. This sparks widespread fear, a sudden reluctance to lend, and an absolute desperate scramble for cash. To see exactly what this panic looks like in the real world, just look at this data from 2007 and 2008. As the squeeze hit, new home sales completely plummeted, dragging down financial equities right along with them. And alongside that, look at that massive vertical spike. That's the TED spread, which measures the risk banks perceive in lending to one another. During the bust, banks literally stopped lending to each other, absolutely terrified they wouldn't get their money back. It created a massive system-wide liquidity crisis. Now, it's really important to note that depending on how a country actually structured its debt, this bust turns into one of two very distinct nightmares. If a country's debt is in its own currency, it typically suffers a deflationary depression. Interest rates hit zero, and forced selling pushes prices down across the board, exactly like the US experienced in the 1930s or in 2008. But on the flip side, if a country relies heavily on foreign capital and its debt is in a foreign currency, it faces an inflationary depression. Capital rapidly flees the country, the local currency collapses, and inflation skyrockets, which is exactly what devastated Germany in the 1920s. Finally, Section 5, the 4 levers for recovery, or how to engineer what Dalio calls a beautiful deleveraging. Here's the good news. Policymakers actually have a specific toolkit to fix this mess. First, there's austerity, which basically means forcing entities to spend less. Second, debt defaults and restructurings, which allows bad debts to just be wiped out. Third, the central bank stepping in and literally printing money. And fourth, wealth transfers from the haves to the have-nots, usually through taxes. By perfectly balancing these 4 levers, mixing the painful deflationary actions of austerity and defaults with the stimulating inflationary action of printing money, policymakers can spread out the burden over time so it doesn't crush the economy all at once. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is summarized perfectly by this quote from Dalio. Ignorance and a lack of authority are bigger problems than debts themselves. Ultimately, the biggest risk to our society isn't the total amount of debt we hold. It's whether our leaders actually have the historical knowledge to pull those 4 levers correctly, and whether the political system grants them the authority to act swiftly when the panic hits. See? Financial crises don't have to be some terrifying mystery if you just understand the cycle and how the machine works. So the next time the market looks completely unstoppable, ask yourself, are we just in a Goldilocks phase, or is the bubble about to burst? If you enjoyed this, subscribe to In 8 Minutes and never miss what matters. I'll catch you on the next explainer.